Self esteem is one of those phrases that we toss around, and it's like a frisbee. Have you ever tried describing a frisbee to someone who has no concept of what it is? Well, self esteem can be a little bit like that. It's something that we know is important, but how exactly do we describe it? And more importantly, how do we develop this in our children from a Christ centered perspective? Well, we're going to talk about that in today's episode. Stay tuned.
If your desire is to become spiritually stronger, emotionally healthier, and relationally smarter, you're at the right place. Speaker and writer Stephanie Smith inspires and equips you to achieve these three key aims. If you're a parent, you also learn how to raise empowered kids ready for adulthood. Let's get started.
What we have looked at recently was this issue of self esteem and how the success of the Jews in rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem in such an extraordinarily short amount of time threatened the nations around them. And it says that their self esteem fell because of the success in Jerusalem. Self esteem is nothing new, and it's incredibly important how we develop that in ourselves and in our kids. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. I'm not sure when the phrase self esteem entered our national vocabulary, but it's something that we use and we develop and we toss around and we know that it's important. But how do we actually define and develop it? That is the tough stuff. I'm going to share with you 7 ideas today on how you can be intentional about developing self esteem in your children. I do not have the end all be all for this, and there is no formula. You've heard me say that before on this podcast. You'll hear me say it again. There are principles for how we raise children, just like there are principles for every other human relationship. But people are complex, and people have this thing that God has given to us called agency or free will, the ability to choose. And what comes along with that is endless options for the routes that people take. There are no formulas or guarantees when it comes to parenting. And anybody who tells you otherwise is either lying or, well, they're just ignorant. And they may be nice and all of that, but they're still ignorant about what is true. So don't fall for those kinds of things. However, that doesn't mean that it doesn't matter how you raise your kids, because again, there are principles in human dynamics that we can learn and we can apply. So, the 7 ideas that I'm going to share with you today aren't the comprehensive, if you do these things, that's going to be the only thing that you need to develop self esteem in your children. But they will get you started, or maybe they will help you to continue on a path that you're on. And it may affirm some things that you're already doing, and it may give you pause to rethink some of the practices that you have fallen into. All right, are you ready? Here we go. Here's number one: treat children with dignity. Okay, now you might be saying, well, of course I do that. I mean, duh. But I want to get you to stop and think about that, because I see this happen so often, and where parents fall into practices and the ways that they deal with their kids that they would never deal with another adult in this way. And it's not a matter that we treat our kids like they are adults in terms of the expectations that we have of them, but we do always want to treat children like they are human beings. So let me kind of give you some practical ways of applying this concept and break this down into more tangible concepts. For example, respect their boundaries. Don't force a child to have physical contact with another person. I get that you want your children to be friendly, you want them to be courteous to other people, and that's absolutely fine. It's okay to teach a child to be expected to say hello or goodbye, for example, but you don't want to say, hey, you have to go hug that person. You have to go give them a kiss. We wouldn't say that to adults. We don't look at each other and, our spouse or a friend or something and say, "Hey, you have to go give that person a hug goodbye." Why do we do that kind of thing with our kids? We want to teach our children um, courtesy, but we don't want to violate their boundaries by expecting things from them that shouldn't be expected. Just because they're young or they're little doesn't mean that we get to say, "Hey, this is required of you." Another way that I would say that we treat children with dignity is how we approach them with in discipline or in correction. And one of the mistakes that good, well meaning parents fall into here is they don't discipline in private. When they're in a setting where there's other people, there's other kids, especially when there's other adults, instead of taking a child aside or going and speaking privately to that child, then they just call the kid out in front of everybody else. And oftentimes this happens with yelling, but even if it's not doesn't reach the point of it's yelling, that does not build self-esteem. And the truth is, usually when that happens, parents aren't really focusing on correcting their child's behavior. They're really wanting to make more of like this public service announcement to all the other kids or adults that are around that kind of says, "Hey, I just want everybody to know I'm not okay with how my child is behaving." And it really becomes more about the embarrassment that a parent feels than it is about correcting a child. If you can't physically take a child away from a situation, you can always go and speak to them privately about it. And if there is something that the child needs to say or do in order to make up for the harm maybe that they've caused to another child, then you can instruct them, okay, then you need to go and you need to give that back. You need to apologize for what you said. I understand that you can give that instruction, and especially as kids get older, you don't always have a way to make that happen. And so sometimes as a parent, it may mean you apologize for what happened to another child or to even another adult. And you say, "Hey, I just want you to know that's not okay. I've spoken to, X child about it. And I'm sorry that they are not going to come out and apologize to you right now. I will be dealing with that. But I do want you to know that I have spoken to them about that." But discipline in private. And this isn't just when you are around other people, and it's also something to think about in terms of your own family. Now, I understand you've got siblings and they're squabbling over blocks and or whatever, and who's using up the bathroom and taking too long and all that kind of thing. And there's a time to sit down with both siblings or however many are involved and to work something out together. I understand that. But let's say that the child is behaving in a way that doesn't have anything to do with the other sibling, then you do want to be mindful of how you correct even in front of other siblings. As much as possible, discipline your child in a private place and speaking to them and not really where you're making announcements to everybody else that's around. Another way that you can treat your children with dignity is to respect their personalities. If you're an extroverted parent, don't be embarrassed if you have an introverted child. And if you're more of an introvert, you don't need to apologize for an extroverted one. And this isn't just about respecting their personalities as to how they engage with other people. It's also about respecting their personalities and your expectations of them at home. One of my sons went to school away from home the second half of his second grade year, and he was an introvert. And when he would come home, he would go off to school every morning just beaming and happy. And also, he would be carrying books from home, so he'd have something to do when he got bored at school. But that's a whole nother story. And by the time he would come home at, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, he was ready to just like bite everybody's heads off. And it took me about a week and a half to figure out what was going on. And it was the fact that as an introvert, he was so overwhelmed by the constant activity that was going on for those several hours. He didn't have any place or any time that he could unwind and he could decompress. And he knew when he came home that his attitude was bad and he felt bad about it. And so what I said to him was, "Son, when you come home, you don't have to talk to anybody. You can just go to your room or you can go outside and you can just take some time and you can just be all by yourself. And it's absolutely okay to do that." And giving him permission to do that, not in some sort of angry or, well, okay, I guess if you can't be nice, you can go to your room. It wasn't like that. It was an understanding he needed time to just decompress and not to have the stress of feeling like he had to come home and be ready to tell me all about his day and all that kind of stuff. And just giving him that permission and making him aware of what was going on inside of him because he's only in the second grade. He doesn't have the capacity at that point to really identify and understand even what's going on inside of him. And that's part of our job as parents is sometimes to teach our children about themselves. And once I did that, it just changed everything. He could come home, he could go to his room, he could go into a different part of the house, he could go outside, and he just knew it was absolutely okay to just be by himself for a while. And then eventually he would kind of bounce back and then he'd want to come out and he'd want to share about the day or he would be ready to engage with his siblings or me or whatever. So we want to treat our children with dignity. The second principle here is that we affirm their existence and we applaud their efforts. We need to let our children know that we affirm them just simply because of who they are. Not it's not transactional. It's not earned. It's not based on something that they've done. That we love them and we approve and we care for them and we affirm their worth and their value simply because they exist. The Bible tells us that Christ came and he died for us while we were still yet sinners. It wasn't a matter that he came and he died for us so that he could get us to a point that then he could love us. It was a matter that while we were still in this dreadful state, he loved us enough that he acted out of that love as a result of that love. And we want our kids to know that they are precious and loved simply because of who they are, not based on their behavior. The second part of that is to applaud their efforts. Another, what I mean by this is there's a difference between affirming them because they simply exist and then applauding work that they do, effort that they put forth. If if a young child, for example, really works on coloring a page, it's absolutely appropriate to say, "Look at that. You chose to do such a good job with that. I like how you chose the selection of colors that you did. That was very creative." That's applauding their efforts. As kids get older, you want to be able to applaud their efforts regardless of the outcome. Every kid does not put in the same effort, for example, to earn an A plus. There are some kids in some subjects that they don't have to do much work at all, and they're going to get that A plus. Other kids can put in 10 times the amount of effort, and they're going to come out with a B. And that's where we want to focus on their efforts, not just the outcomes. A third principle is to be intentional about being attentional. Constant attention cultivates an expectation in a child to be the center of attention. And this deprives a child of the ability to develop self contentment and self confidence. Yet, inadequate attention teaches a child they're not important. As human beings, we have a deep need to be seen and heard. And children will respond to this need in a couple of different ways. One is they will either find a way to get this need met through performance or creating havoc, because even if I create havoc, hey, at least I'm still being seen and heard. Or they will learn to deny their needs. They'll learn to start talking themselves out of what's important to them. That doesn't work well in life. Or, and this is something we don't always think about, they will develop an appetite for self pity. When children have needs that don't get met, this can be one of the results. They feel the pain of this need that's not met, and it turns into self pity. I mean, it's legitimate pain, but pain can very easily morph into self pity, and they can develop an appetite for that. And that does not serve a person well in life either. Now, I have to make one comment here about this whole idea of being intentional about being attentional, and that regards technology. One of the concerns that researchers are having right now is that infants aren't bonding the way that they need to for optimal human development. They're also being incapacitated in their language skills and their capacity for language and for relationship because there's less talking to them and there's less eye contact because parents and caregivers have their eyes and ears too attuned to their screens. When an infant is born and for a period of time and they're nursing or they're being held in such a way, if they're being bottle fed, it's the optimal distance for eye contact that in that position. And when parents and whether it's a father that's holding an infant and bottle feeding, or it's a mother who's nursing an infant, when they're just like, okay, I'm just feeding this baby, but my eyes are over here on my phone, they are depriving that child of something that God has designed is an optimal position and placement for eye contact. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to just sit there and just, stare at your baby the entire time, but be mindful that this is something that is showing up. And that's why we have to be intentional about being attentional. We just have to have the courage to say, how much attention am I really paying to my children? And this is where, again, when we go back and we talk about treating children with dignity and respecting their personalities, this is where we need to understand some children will fight you for attention. They won't give up. They will keep coming and saying, mama, 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 or they will keep saying, dad, dad, dad. Some children won't. They'll say it once or twice, and if you don't tune in, they're gone. And we need to be respectful and mindful of that and not just assume that children will continue to fight to get their need to be heard, to be seen, to be recognized, met, because that doesn't always happen. Wow, that took more time to walk through those 3 insights than I had intended. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save the next 4 for the next week's podcast. When we come back to this and we talk specifically on our Thursday episodes about raising kids who are spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart. So come back for the other 4 insights on building healthy self-esteem in your kids next Thursday. And I'll be back next Tuesday as we continue our walk through the book of Nehemiah and we bring the Bible to life for life. Thanks so much for being with me. If you haven't already, go to the website, stephaniepresents.com, sign up for High Impact. You're going to get exclusive content there, as well as easy links to the podcast, and also resources that I recommend from other people and resources as I make them available myself. Remember this, my friend, you have an impact that is immeasurable, eternal, and irreplaceable. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening. Visit the website stephaniepresents.com and sign up for High Impact to join the mission of building spiritually strong, emotionally healthy, and relationally smart women and families. You can also book Stephanie to speak at your event and check out additional resources. Together, we can invite and equip generations to engage fully in God's grand story.